Imagine, just for a second, a timeline. Fast forward 10 years from this exact moment you are in right now.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You are looking back at your life, and this quiet, really unsettling realization washes over you. You recognize that your deepest, most painful regrets aren't actually going to stem from the times you tried and failed.
Right. They aren't about the embarrassing mistakes or, the business ventures that went completely bankrupt.
Exactly. It is not about the public missteps where you fell flat on your face. No, the regret that truly keeps you awake at night staring at the ceiling is the slow, comfortable realization that you never actually committed to your own potential.
Wow. Yeah, that is a heavy thought.
It really is. You played it safe. You waited for the right time, the perfect economic conditions, the ideal state of mental readiness.
And in doing so, in playing that waiting game, you just let a decade slip through your fingers like water.
But what if we completely flip the script on that timeline? What if the window required to entirely rewrite your life, your identity, and your future wasn't measured in years or decades?
That changes the entire paradigm.
It does. What if it took exactly 88 days? Welcome to audiobook mode.
That is just a phenomenal thought experiment to start with because it immediately strikes at the core of human complacency.
It really exposes how we think about time, right?
Absolutely. We have been deeply conditioned, practically since childhood, to measure significant life changes in massive sweeping eras.
Like a 4-year college degree or a 10-year career track.
Exactly. Or even a lifetime of saving for retirement. We inherently tell ourselves that fundamentally altering who we are and what we are capable of achieving must require years of agonizing slow progress.
We are always waiting for that mythical one day.
Yes. The day when the stars perfectly align, when our motivation is dialed in, and when the friction of daily life simply vanishes. But the focus of our conversation today completely shatters that illusion.
I am so ready to get into this. We are exploring the concepts inside 88 Days to Any Goal by Dr. Roland Roberts.
And the central thesis here is highly disruptive. It argues that extraordinary success isn't the result of a lifetime of grueling, unrelenting grinding.
Right, and it isn't dependent on some innate genetic talent either.
Not at all. It is actually forged in a ruthless, intense, and finite period of hyper-focused commitment.
I hear that premise, and I have to be honest, my immediate reaction is a little bit of skepticism.
Which is completely fair.
I think that's where a lot of people listening right now might be. I mean, we live in a world absolutely saturated with productivity hacks and arbitrary timelines.
Oh, totally. 30-day shred challenges, 75-day mental toughness programs.
Right, and 90-day corporate sprint quarters. So when I hear 88 days, the cynical part of my brain just says, well, that's just a number chosen because it looks good on a book cover.
It is a very specific number.
It is. I struggle to accept that there is something fundamentally magical about the number 88. Is there actual psychological architecture supporting this specific window, or are we just picking a timeline that sounds achievable to sell a concept?
That is exactly the right lens to view this through. The skepticism is completely warranted because we are constantly bombarded with arbitrary timelines.
Right. So why 88?
To understand why Dr. Roberts points to 88 days, we first have to deconstruct why all the other traditional timelines fail so spectacularly.
Okay, let's break that down.
We have to look at what is called the cycle of average, which is a psychological trap practically everyone has fallen into at some point. Think about the anatomy of a typical burst of ambition.
It usually doesn't come from a good place.
Exactly. It rarely starts from a place of quiet, grounded clarity. It almost always starts with a negative emotion, usually guilt or sheer frustration.
Like you look in the mirror or you check your bank account and you feel this sharp pang of inadequacy.
Right. And that guilt triggers a desperate need for a solution. So what do? You consume highly emotive, motivational content late at night.
Oh, the 2 a.m. motivational rabbit hole.
Yes. And your brain floods with dopamine just from the mere thought of changing your life. You haven't done any actual work yet, but you feel incredible.
Right. It's the classic Sunday night phenomenon. You declare that starting Monday, you are waking up at 4:30 a.m., running 5 miles, eating nothing but raw vegetables, and launching a multinational corporation.
You've solved your whole life in your head.
Exactly. The dopamine hit from the fantasy is so incredibly strong that you actually mistake the intention for the achievement.
Precisely. You are getting the neurochemical reward before taking a single action. So Monday finally arrives.
And you ride that residual adrenaline for what, maybe 48 hours?
If you're lucky, you put in a level of intense, completely unsustainable effort. But by Wednesday, the biological reality sets in.
A
A massive crash. Your cortisol levels spike from the sudden stress. The dopamine from the fantasy evaporates because the reality is difficult and mundane, and your willpower completely depletes.
Because willpower operates like a finite battery, right?
Exactly. So you crash, you slide right back into your old comfortable routines because your brain is practically screaming for homeostasis.
It just wants to be comfortable again.
And over time, as you cycle through this pattern of high emotional hopes and rapid behavioral failures, you normalize an average existence.
You essentially teach yourself how to fail.
Worse than that, you induce a state of learned helplessness. You literally kill your internal drive because your subconscious learns that your sudden bursts of enthusiasm are totally hollow.
Wow, so it literally stops trusting your intentions.
Exactly. It knows you are lying to yourself.
So the brain essentially builds up an immunity to your own ambition. After the fifth or sixth time you declare that your life is changing, your nervous system just rolls its eyes.
That is a brilliant way to put it. It knows the drill.
It knows you're going to quit by Thursday, so it doesn't even bother rallying the energy to support you. That makes complete sense.
But that only explains why the 2-day bursts fail.
Right. It doesn't fully explain why we can't just set a 1-year goal, or why a 30-day challenge isn't enough to override that immunity.
Let's look at the mechanics of those longer and shorter timelines. Why not a year? Because human beings are notoriously terrible at conceptualizing long-term time horizons.
We just can't picture our lives that far out.
From an evolutionary perspective, our brains are optimized for immediate survival. They are not built for projecting behavioral consistency 365 days into the future.
So it's overwhelming.
It is deeply overwhelming.
Yeah.
When you tell your brain it has to sustain extreme discipline, sacrifice, and discomfort for an entire year, it triggers a literal fear response.
The amygdala freaks out.
Right. It perceives that sustained effort as an existential threat to your energy reserves. It induces mental exhaustion before you even take the first step.
Because it feels like an infinite prison sentence of hard labor. You succumb to fatigue merely by contemplating the timeline.
Exactly. Now, what about the 30-day challenges?
Well, they're everywhere because they're so marketable. 30 days sounds incredibly doable.
They are highly marketable, but they are neurologically insufficient for lasting identity change. 30 days is enough time to initiate a new habit loop.
To get accustomed to the mechanics of waking up early or going to the gym.
Sure, but it is not long enough to survive what behavioral psychologists call the valley of disappointment.
What exactly is that valley?
The first few weeks of any new endeavor are fueled by novelty. The new routine is interesting, it feels fresh, but around day 30 or 40, the novelty wears off completely.
And the actual measurable results haven't materialized yet.
Exactly. This is where the friction is highest. If your timeline is only 30 days, you cross the finish line right as the hardest part begins.
So you inevitably revert back to baseline shortly after because the behavior hasn't anchored into your core identity yet.
Which finally brings us to the 88 days.
Right. The psychological Goldilocks zone.
Yes, the 88-day framework operates in a very specific psychological zone. It is long enough to cross entirely through that valley of disappointment.
It forces you to endure the period where the novelty is gone, the motivation is completely dead, and the results are still invisible.
By pushing through that specific window, you begin to physically rewire the neural pathways in your brain through sheer, brute repetition.
You transition the behavior from the prefrontal cortex, which requires active, exhausting, conscious thought, right?
Exactly. You transition it to the basal ganglia, where behaviors actually become automatic. You don't have to think about them anymore.
But crucially, 88 days is short enough that your conscious mind still views it as a finite, manageable sprint.
Yes. When the alarm goes off on day 50 and you desperately want to quit, you can rationalize with yourself.
You can just say, it's just an 88-day sprint. The finish line is tangible. I can survive anything for another 38 days.
It lowers the barrier to entry while maintaining enough duration to force a genuine metamorphosis.
That structural framing actually reminds me of the stonecutter analogy from the book, which I think is incredibly vital for listeners to internalize.
Oh, it is one of the most powerful concepts in the entire text.
I want to spend a minute on this because it perfectly captures the agonizing reality of those middle days, like days 40 through 70 of this process.
The hardest days.
Exactly. Imagine a stonecutter facing a massive, seemingly impenetrable boulder. He takes his heavy hammer and strikes the rock. Whack! Nothing happens.
Not even scratch.
Right. He strikes it 10 times, 20 times, 40 times. To the naked eye, not a single grain of dust has moved. There isn't a microscopic fissure anywhere on the surface.
It looks like a complete waste of energy.
But then, on the 51st blow, the rock violently splits completely in two. Now, any rational person knows the 51st blow didn't magically contain 100 times more kinetic energy than the previous swings.
No, it was the cumulative, invisible internal pressure of the 50 blows that came before it that actually compromised the structural integrity of the stone.
The invisible work. That is the fundamental concept people struggle with the most.
We are biologically wired to expect immediate cause and effect. I touch a hot stove, I feel pain immediately.
Right. I eat sugar, I feel a spike of energy immediately.
Exactly. But mastery, wealth accumulation, physical transformation, or skill acquisition do not follow that linear, immediate feedback loop.
They follow an exponential curve.
Yes, and the most dangerous point on that curve is the flat line at the very beginning, where the effort is extraordinarily high, but the visible output is practically zero.
And I would argue that modern society has engineered an environment that makes surviving that flat line nearly impossible.
That do you mean?
Well, we live in a culture that not only expects immediate gratification, but aggressively punishes patience through the weaponization of comparison.
Social media.
Yes. You are swinging your hammer at your boulder on day 40, your hands are bleeding, you are exhausted, and you have zero visible progress.
So what do?
You take a break and open your phone, and the algorithm instantly feeds you a video of someone else whose boulder just split in half.
That is brutal. You are forced to compare your grueling, invisible Chapter 1 to their victorious, highly edited Chapter 20.
Exactly. You don't see the 50 swings they took in the dark, praying in their garage, doubting everything. You just see the rock split.
That asymmetry of information is devastating to the human psyche. Because you only witness their sudden success, and you only feel your current struggle, your brain draws a deeply flawed conclusion.
It tells you I must lack the innate talent. My boulder must be defective. I should just quit.
And so you walk away on day 40, right before the internal pressure would have cracked the stone.
That is just tragic. So how does the 88-day sprint help with this?
The 88-day framework acts as a psychological blinder. It is a commitment that says, for the next 88 days, I am not evaluating the rock.
I'm not checking the surface for cracks.
Exactly. I am only evaluating my consistency in swinging the hammer. It removes the anxiety of real-time comparison because the result is entirely irrelevant until day 89.
I love that distinction. You are evaluating the swing, not the rock.
It completely shifts your locus of control.
But that immediately triggers my next major concern. Let's say I accept the timeline. I put on the blinders. I commit to swinging the hammer for 88 days without looking for the cracks.
Okay, you are fully in.
Speed and intensity are phenomenal, but they are mathematically useless if my compass is completely broken.
Direction over velocity.
Right? If I am swinging at the wrong rock, or, to use a different visual, if I am sprinting at maximum speed on a treadmill, I am going to end up exhausted and exactly where I started.
Yes, you have to know where you're going.
How does the framework address the direction of this intensity? Because picking the goal seems just as hard as executing it.
This is a crucial pivot in Dr. Roberts' philosophy, and it touches on what we might call the modern paradox of choice.
We definitely have too many choices right now.
If you look back a few generations, the path was relatively linear, and the options were constrained by geography and social class. Today, people are paralyzed not by a lack of opportunity, but by an absolute avalanche of endless possibilities.
The digital landscape just algorithmically designs a new, seductive dream for you every single time you swipe your screen.
It really does. At 9 a.m., you are absolutely convinced you need to learn Python and become an AI developer.
Right. And at 10:15 a.m., a beautifully shot video convinces you that true freedom is actually buying real estate with no money down.
And by noon, you feel an overwhelming urge to sell all your belongings, move to Bali, and become a digital nomad.
It is totally exhausting. It's like walking into a massive, opulent restaurant with a 100-page menu. You are starving, but the sheer volume of choices induces a panic attack.
So what do we naturally do in that situation?
We look at the table next to us, we see a guy eating a steak, he looks incredibly happy, and we just tell the waiter, I'll have what he's having.
Even if we don't actually like steak.
Exactly. We outsource our desires because navigating our own internal compass is just too overwhelming.
That is an incredibly accurate depiction of mimetic desire. We don't just want things, we want what other people want, because their desire signals value to us.
We literally borrow goals that don't belong to us.
And this leads to what is arguably the most sobering and deeply emotional concept explored in the book, which is the tragedy of wrong success.
Wrong success. That phrase alone is chilling.
We spend so much of our waking lives terrified of failure. We agonize over the possibility of looking foolish, of trying a business and going bankrupt, or going back to school and dropping out.
Because failure hurts the ego.
Right. But Dr. Roberts argues that failure is actually a relatively benign outcome. You fail, you learn a lesson, your ego bruises, but you recover and pivot.
So what is the alternative?
The truly devastating outcome in life is wrong success.
The idea of succeeding at the wrong thing, that gives me a knot in my stomach just thinking about it.
It should, because the cost is measured in the non-renewable resource of time. Imagine this scenario. You spend 15 years of your life pursuing a goal you borrowed from someone else.
Like a specific corporate title that sounded impressive to your parents.
Yes. Or a level of financial wealth you saw glorified on the internet. You sacrifice your physical health, sleeping 4 hours a night, and living on caffeine.
You sacrifice your peace of mind just living in a constant state of elevated cortisol.
You miss your children growing up, and your friendships wither into superficial text messages, but you push through, and finally, you reach the summit. You plant your flag.
You get the title, the money, the house.
And then the silence hits. You stand at the top, you look around, and a hollow, crushing realization washes over you. You are absolutely miserable.
You won the game, but you realize too late that it was a game you never actually wanted to play.
You spent a decade climbing a ladder, bleeding on every rung, only to reach the top and realize the ladder was leaning against a completely wrong wall.
That is devastating.
The biological and psychological toll of wrong success is immense because there is no external enemy left to fight. You can't blame circumstance or bad luck. You succeeded.
But your internal dopamine system, the neurochemistry that rewards meaningful progress, is completely flatlined because the achievement doesn't align with your core values.
That realization is infinitely more painful than failing at a goal you truly loved.
Okay, I hear that, and my immediate reaction is absolute paralysis. If the penalty for choosing the wrong direction is 15 years of a hollow, miserable existence, my rational brain says, do not move until you are 100% certain.
That instinct to freeze is a very natural protective mechanism. We want to guarantee before we invest the energy.
I feel like this threat of wrong success is exactly why so many people freeze. We sit on our couches, endlessly journaling, taking personality tests, waiting for some cinematic lightning bolt of clarity to strike us from the heavens.
We just want the answer handed to us.
Right. We tell ourselves, once I figure out my undeniable ultimate life purpose, then I will start my 88-day sprint. How does the book suggest we navigate this? Because sitting still clearly isn't the answer, but sprinting blindly is dangerous.
Dr. Roberts presents a very counterintuitive point here, one that completely upends the self-help industry's obsession with finding your passion.
Oh, I can't wait to hear this.
His philosophy is that clarity does not, and biologically cannot, come from sitting in a quiet room, meditating, and trying to think your way into a life purpose.
So all the journaling isn't helping.
The brain simply cannot process data it hasn't gathered. Clarity is not a prerequisite to action. Clarity is the actual result of messy, real-world action.
You discover your direction through the process of elimination and sensory feedback.
Exactly.
So we have to treat our lives more like a laboratory than a drafting table. You can't steer a parked car, right?
That is a perfect analogy.
If I sit in the driveway staring at a map for 5 years, I haven't traveled a single inch, and I still don't know what the actual terrain feels like. I have to put the car in drive, press the accelerator, and see how the steering wheel feels in my hands.
Even if you take a wrong turn, the act of moving gives you spatial awareness. The scientific term for that physical awareness is proprioception, your body's ability to know where it is in space.
And we need psychological proprioception?
Yes, and you only get that through friction. You try a new project at work, and within 2 weeks you realize you absolutely despise managing spreadsheets. The data feels lifeless, and you dread opening the computer.
That is not a failure. That is highly valuable data. That is clarity.
Exactly. Then maybe you volunteer to give a presentation to the team. Your hands are shaking, you're terrified, but the moment you start speaking, you feel electrified. You feel a surge of genuine intrinsic energy.
That is also clarity, but you only accessed those internal reactions, the dread and the electricity, by getting your hands dirty.
So the 88-day framework isn't necessarily about picking the absolute perfect lifelong goal on day one. It can be an 88-day sprint into a specific skill or project just to gather intense, rapid data on whether it actually resonates with you.
You're just compressing the timeline of discovery.
Precisely. You are radically reducing the latency between curiosity and feedback. And once you have that direction, once you've stumbled through the messy action and found a path that genuinely lights you up, you lock in the 88-day timeline.
Okay, so we have a timeline and we have our direction, but immediately we hit the next massive roadblock. And I want to be clear here. The obstacle that will derail your 88-day sprint is not your competitors.
It is not the economy, and it is not a lack of access to resources either.
No, the singular, most destructive obstacle standing between you and your goal is the absolute erosion of your own attention span.
We have to go deep on this.
Yeah.
Because the war for our focus is the defining struggle of our generation.
If the ability to direct and hold our attention is a superpower, and I truly believe it is, most of us are walking around with our kryptonite permanently glued to our palms.
It is not an exaggeration to call it a physiological crisis. Dr. Roberts details how our minds are constantly fighting a heavily asymmetrical war for attention.
You really have to understand what you are up against.
When you sit down to focus on your 88-day goal, you are not just fighting your own lack of discipline. You are fighting thousands of the brightest behavioral psychologists and software engineers in the world whose full-time job is to hijack your dopamine system.
Every app, every notification ping, every endless scroll feature is mathematically engineered using principles derived directly from slot machines.
The intermittent reinforcement schedule. It is simply the most addictive psychological loop in existence.
If you pull the lever or refresh the feed and you don't know if you're going to get nothing or if you're going to get a massive hit of novelty and social validation.
And that unpredictability is what drives the brain completely insane with craving. The consequence of being subjected to this intermittent reinforcement thousands of times a day is that our brains actually adapt to it.
Because neuroplasticity works in both directions, right?
Exactly. The brain becomes wired for shallow thinking, rapid context switching, and instant dopamine gratification. The result is that physically, you might have slept 8 hours and eaten a great breakfast, but mentally, you are entirely scattered.
You exist in a chronic state of continuous partial attention.
You sit down to write a business proposal, but a fraction of your cognitive bandwidth is actively listening for the vibration of your phone. Another fraction is subconsciously wondering if anyone liked your recent post.
You are just never fully present. And you simply cannot achieve the velocity required in an 88-day sprint if your cognitive engine is constantly misfiring like that.
It feels like we've completely pathologized boredom. We literally, biologically, cannot handle being understimulated for 3 consecutive minutes.
Think about a mundane scenario. You are standing in line at the grocery store. There are 2 people ahead of you with full carts. The wait will be exactly 120 seconds. What happens?
Your hand instinctively, without any conscious thought, reaches into your pocket and pulls out the phone.
You cannot just exist in a neutral state, staring at the chewing gum rack, alone with your own thoughts for 2 minutes. It feels genuinely agonizing.
And the downstream consequence of that intolerance for boredom is devastating. Because, as the book points out, true success, true mastery, is fundamentally built on an incredible tolerance for extremely boring repetition.
That is the hard, unvarnished truth that the modern self-improvement industry constantly tries to gloss over.
The foundation of mastery is absolute boredom. People look at the end result, the financially independent entrepreneur with multiple revenue streams or the athlete with the incredibly dialed-in physique, and they intensely desire that outcome.
But they absolutely refuse to endure the daily, profoundly unglamorous sacrifices required to get there.
The human mind is drawn to novelty, like a moth to a flame. We want the new, exciting strategy. We want the secret hack.
We don't want to execute the exact same fundamental, tedious drill 1,000 times in a row. I think we need a really vivid visual to hammer this home, because we deeply misinterpret what greatness actually looks like.
What kind of visual?
Let's look at a world-class concert pianist or an Olympic gymnast. When you sit in the audience and watch them perform, what are you actually seeing?
You see perfection.
Right. You see them on the grand stage, the acoustics are perfect, the lights are shining down, they're wearing the tuxedo or the leotard, and they execute a routine that seems almost magical. It looks incredibly fluid.
It looks like they were touched by the divine with this effortless, innate talent.
Exactly. But what you completely miss, what was entirely hidden from your view, were the thousands of lonely, utterly boring hours of practice in a sterile, empty room with bad lighting when absolutely nobody was watching.
You didn't see the Tuesday mornings when they woke up exhausted.
Right. When their fingers ached, when they were in a terrible mood, and they absolutely did not feel like playing the piano, but they sat on the bench and practiced the same 4-bar progression for 3 hours anyway.
What is fascinating about that analogy is how modern culture actively distorts our understanding of that process. Because we live in a digital era that exclusively broadcasts the highlight reel, we have developed a deeply skewed, almost delusional perception of how reality works.
We only see the gold medals and the exit valuations.
So when an ordinary person embarks on their 88-day sprint, they start strong for a week, and then they hit the inevitable boredom plateau. The task becomes totally tedious.
And they look around at all the highlight reels on their feed and they draw a false, incredibly damaging conclusion.
They tell themselves, well, if I were truly meant to do this, if this was my true calling, it wouldn't feel this boring and difficult. The universe would make it flow.
They conclude they lack the required talent, but they don't lack talent. They lack a tolerance for boredom. They lack sustained focus.
That is such a critical reframe. The presence of boredom doesn't mean you're on the wrong path. It usually means you are doing exactly what is required.
But this brings us to a massive practical wall in the book's framework. If sustaining that boring repetition for 88 days requires something far deeper and more resilient than just waking up in a good mood and listening to a hype song, how do we actually execute it?
Relying on motivation.
Exactly. Because we all know motivation is a terrible, highly unreliable strategy. At 5 a.m., when the alarm goes off and it's raining outside, motivation simply does not exist.
Dr. Roberts is very clear in breaking down the fatal flaw of relying on motivation. You have to analyze what motivation actually is from a biological standpoint.
Motivation is merely an emotion.
Yes, it is a neurochemical state. And by definition, emotions are temporary, volatile, and highly dependent on trivial external circumstances.
Your motivation will fluctuate wildly based on your blood sugar levels or the quality of your sleep the night before.
Or whether a stranger cut you off in traffic on your commute, or even how much caffeine you've consumed. You simply cannot build a solid, unshakable foundation for a life-altering 88-day sprint on an infrastructure as fragile as a fleeting emotion.
Habits, however, are a completely different mechanism, right?
Yes, they are an automatic neurological loop housed in a different part of the brain. They completely bypass the prefrontal cortex's need for emotional buy-in.
It's the toothbrushing analog. You don't need to read a motivational quote to convince yourself to brush your teeth before bed.
You don't assess your emotional readiness, you just do it, because it is a systemized, non-negotiable part of your existence.
But here is where the real friction lies. How do we transition the hard things into that non-negotiable category?
That is the million-dollar question.
How do you systemize waking up at 5 a.m. to write a book or making 50 cold sales calls a day when every fiber of your being wants to avoid the rejection and discomfort?
This is where Dr. Roberts introduces the concept of the identity shift. And I would argue this is the most profound foundational insight in the entire 88-day framework.
It changes everything about how you set goals.
Most people approach goals completely backward. They focus entirely on the outcome, like, I want to lose 20 pounds. To achieve the outcome, they try to force the behavior. They say, I will suffer through eating salads.
But his philosophy dictates that we do not repeat actions simply because we logically know they are good for us.
Nor do we repeat them because we enjoy them. We repeat actions because they strictly align with our core identity. We act in accordance with who we subconsciously believe we are.
Okay, let's slow down and really unpack the mechanics of that because it's massive. Cognitive dissonance is at play here?
Exactly. Cognitive dissonance is the severe psychological discomfort a person feels when their beliefs contradict their actions. The brain hates this contradiction and will always try to resolve it.
So let's say a person deeply believes at their core that they are lazy or not a morning person or just bad with money.
If they try to wake up at 5 a.m. to work on a budget, their brain experiences intense dissonance. The action, which is discipline, contradicts the identity, which is lazy.
To resolve the discomfort, the subconscious mind will actively sabotage the effort. It will rationalize hitting the snooze button just to restore harmony with the belief that they are lazy.
You cannot permanently change a habit just by forcing boot strength behavior. You must fundamentally alter the internal narrative of how you see yourself.
I want to pause on this and make it extremely practical for the listener because it carries so much emotional weight in our tiny everyday decisions.
It really does come down to the micro moments.
Think about something as incredibly mundane as your morning alarm. You set it for 6 a.m. the night before, feeling highly motivated. The alarm goes off, it's dark, it's cold.
And you think, oh, it's just 5 more minutes of sleep. Hitting snooze once doesn't matter. It won't ruin my life.
But Dr. Roberts is asking you to entirely reframe the mechanism of that moment. When you hit that snooze button, you aren't just stealing a biologically insignificant 5 minutes of rest.
What are you actually doing?
You are actively, consciously signaling to your own nervous system, I am someone who breaks promises to myself. I set a firm intention last night, and the exact second the environment got slightly uncomfortable, I abandoned my word.
You are casting a neurological vote for an identity of complete unreliability.
And if we connect this to the broader psychological concept of self-esteem, it completely shatters the modern self-help paradigm.
We are constantly sold this incredibly hollow idea that self-esteem and confidence come from standing in front of a mirror and reciting positive affirmations.
Right, like, I am strong, I am a millionaire, I am a disciplined executor.
But your brain is far too sophisticated for that trick. If your actions throughout the day consistently contradict those words, your brain absolutely knows you are lying to it.
You just cannot hack confidence.
True, unshakable, quiet confidence doesn't come from affirmations. It comes from building a daily, irrefutable track record of keeping your own word to yourself.
It's an accumulation of undeniable evidence.
Precisely. When the alarm goes off and you desperately want to sleep, but you swing your legs out of bed anyway.
When you sit down at the computer and you really want to scroll social media, but you write the chapter anyway.
Every single time you execute, despite the emotional resistance, you are placing a brick on the foundation of a new identity. You are providing your brain with undeniable proof of your capability.
Over the course of the 88 days, your identity organically shifts from I am someone who wishes for things and quits to I am someone who executes regardless of how I feel.
And once that identity takes root, the friction drops to near zero. The sprint becomes infinitely more manageable because you are no longer fighting a war against your own self-image.
You don't have to convince yourself to work, it's just who you are.
Exactly.
So if we follow the logic, we rationally know that keeping micro-promises to ourselves builds our identity. We know it creates self-respect and confidence. We know the 88 days will transform us.
Yes.
If the mechanics are so clear, why do we constantly routinely break these promises? Why is the failure rate so astronomical?
The answer the book points to isn't a lack of intelligence. It lies in human nature's inescapable biological gravitational pull toward comfort.
The comfort zone. It sounds like a cliche, but when you examine it through the lens of evolutionary biology, it is the ultimate silent assassin of human potential.
Dr. Roberts explores why comfort is so insidious. And the terrifying reality is that it doesn't stop you with acute pain. It doesn't stop you with loud, dramatic failures or insurmountable trauma.
It stops you with softness.
It is, as he vividly describes it, a sweet poison. You don't even realize you are being poisoned because the taste is so immediately soothing.
We really have to give context to why our brains crave this poison. We aren't broken, we're just operating on seriously outdated hardware.
That is the perfect way to phrase it. For 99% of human history, the environment was incredibly hostile. The human brain evolved to prioritize two primary directives.
Avoiding physical risk and conserving metabolic energy.
Right. For our ancestors roaming the savannah, exploring the unknown meant a high probability of being eaten by a predator. Burning unnecessary calories, pursuing something without an immediate payoff, literally meant starvation.
So when your brain tells you to stay on the couch, conserve energy, and watch a screen, instead of leaning into the cognitive strain of building a business, it feels incredibly deeply logical.
Your biology is literally screaming at you that comfort equals survival.
But the mismatch is that in the modern industrialized world, comfort no longer equals survival. Comfort equals complete stagnation.
And I want to make sure we don't just define comfort as lying on the sofa eating junk food. The physical laziness is obvious.
But the book dives into something much more dangerous, which is mental comfort.
Yes, the psychological comfort zone is where the trap gets highly sophisticated. Mental comfort is surrounding yourself exclusively with people who validate your existing worldview and never challenge your assumptions.
It is actively avoiding environments where you might be the least intelligent person in the room.
It is shielding yourself from constructive criticism just because it might temporarily bruise your ego. And most prevalently today, it is the constant reflexive escaping into our devices.
The absolute second we feel a micro twinge of boredom, loneliness, anxiety, or imposter syndrome, we self-medicate by opening an app.
We refuse to sit with the discomfort of our own internal state.
And the tragedy of that constant emotional escapism is what it does to our resilience. If you never allow yourself to feel the friction of anxiety, if you instantly numb it with cheap dopamine, you become incredibly mentally fragile.
It is exactly like the physiology of physical training.
Right. Let's say you want a bicep muscle to grow. You don't wrap your arm in a warm plush blanket and feed it hot chocolate. That will just cause the muscle to atrophy.
If you want the muscle to grow, you have to subject it to heavy, intense stress.
You have to lift weights that are uncomfortably heavy, which creates literal microscopic tearing in the muscle fibers. It is only through that friction, that biological damage, and the subsequent repair process that the muscle adapts and grows stronger.
The psychological architecture of the mind operates on the exact same biological principle. It requires the friction of doing hard, uncomfortable things to build emotional and mental resilience.
If your life has zero pressure, it will have zero growth.
You are quite literally atrophying your own potential by aggressively seeking a frictionless existence. The 88-day sprint is strictly designed to be the heavyweight.
It is meant to cause that microscopic psychological tearing so that you can rebuild a denser, stronger identity.
But right before someone commits to picking up that heavyweight, right before they actually begin day one of the 88 days, they almost always deploy one final, incredibly sophisticated defense mechanism.
And I have to admit, this is the one I am most personally guilty of.
Which one is that?
It's the desperate desire to have the perfect, flawless plan before taking the very first step. We tell ourselves, I am fully committed to the 88 days. I just need to do a little more research.
I need to read one more book on the topic. I need to watch 3 more tutorials. I need the perfect software stack.
The trap of perfectionism. It is arguably the most dangerous hurdle because, unlike sitting on the couch eating potato chips, perfectionism actually feels like productive work.
Exactly. It masquerades as diligence.
It is the ultimate illusion.
Dr. Roberts completely dismantles this idea, spending months researching, buying the perfect domain name, color-coding your digital calendar, designing a logo for a business that has no customers, and waiting for the absolute right time when the economy is better or you have a clearer schedule. It feels productive.
But you have to radically honest with yourself. It is actually a highly sophisticated version of laziness.
It is a psychological defense mechanism. What you are really doing is masking your deep-seated fear of failure and your fear of public judgment.
Because if you are forever in the planning and researching phase, you can never be criticized. A business plan that only exists on your hard drive cannot fail.
You can't fail a test you refuse to take.
Yeah.
But you also ensure you never pass it. You guarantee a score of 0.
That is the harsh reality. And this realization leads directly to Dr. Roberts' philosophy on speed and imperfect action.
In the context of the 88-day framework, speed is vastly more vital than perfection.
Now, we need to be very precise about what speed means here, because we aren't advocating for frantic, chaotic rushing where you act recklessly and destroy capital or relationships.
Speed in this context means ruthlessly reducing the hesitation time between having an idea and executing it. It means shrinking the delta between intention and action.
It is about momentum over pristine planning. I love this concept, and it makes me think of the analogy of learning to swim.
Imagine 2 different people standing at the edge of a pool, and both have a goal to learn how to swim.
The first person is terrified of looking foolish. So they sit on the side of the pool in a dry swimsuit. They buy 5 different textbooks on fluid dynamics and the biomechanics of the freestyle stroke.
They watch hours of slow-motion footage of Olympic swimmers, obsessively analyzing the exact angle of the elbow during the catch phase.
They spend 3 months preparing, wanting to be completely, perfectly ready before they let a single drop of water touch them.
What does the second person do?
The second person just jumps into the shallow end. They don't know the biomechanics, they splash around frantically, they look incredibly awkward and uncoordinated.
They accidentally swallow a mouthful of chlorinated water, they cough, their eyes sting, and they struggle.
But here is the undeniable truth. Fast forward 2 weeks. Who actually understands how to swim? Who actually has a feel for the buoyancy of the water?
It's the person in the pool.
If we extract the lesson from that analogy and apply it to our career or personal goals, the implication is clear, and it is a bitter pill for perfectionists to swallow.
The beginning of any meaningful endeavor is supposed to be messy.
It is inherently supposed to be awkward and unrefined. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, famously said that if you are not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you launched too late.
If you aren't slightly embarrassed by your first attempt at something new or your first sales pitch or your first attempt at painting, you waited far too long to get into the water.
The world simply does not reward the pristine thinkers who hold their brilliant, flawless ideas safely in their heads forever.
The world and the marketplace strictly rewards the messy, imperfect doers who are willing to execute, swallow some water, and iterate in real time.
And that is the absolute beauty of the 88-day cycle. It forces you into the water. You literally do not have the luxury of spending 6 months planning because your entire window closes in less than 3 months.
You have to move. You have to bias toward action.
As we start to synthesize all these incredibly deep psychological threads, we have to recognize what the 88-day framework truly represents.
It's very easy to look at a book titled 88 Days to Any Goal and dismiss it as just another superficial productivity hack.
It's easy to assume it's just a time management strategy to help you check a few more trivial boxes off your daily to-do list so you can feel slightly more efficient.
But what we've uncovered today is that it is something much more profound. It is a crucible.
It is a deliberate, intense, and finite fire that you voluntarily walk into.
And its ultimate purpose is to completely destroy a weak, comfort-addicted, excuse-making version of yourself and forge a new, unbreakable, identity-driven self in its place.
It is a complete paradigm shift regarding how we approach human potential.
It absolutely is. Executing this requires you to consciously, almost aggressively, give up the need for daily motivation.
You have to accept that inspiration is for amateurs, and you must embrace the boring, tedious repetition that true mastery demands.
You have to recognize the sweet poison of your comfort zone, step willingly out of the warm blanket of mental and physical stagnation, and lean directly into the sharp, intimidating discomfort of imperfect action.
It is about moving fast, failing small, gathering data quickly, and above all else, keeping those micro promises to yourself every single day for exactly 88 days.
We really have to acknowledge Dr. Roland Roberts here, because the profound value of 88 days to any goal is how it takes the paralyzing heavy weight of lifetime goals and condenses it into a highly intense, actionable, and life-altering sprint.
It takes the impossible and makes it feel incredibly immediate and urgent. It creates an urgency that our brains actually respect.
It forces you to stop hiding.
And so, as we wrap up this conversation, I want to leave you, the listener, with one final, deeply provocative thought to sit with today.
What is that?
I want you to mentally scan your life and think about all the unused potential currently sitting dormant inside you. Think about all the business ideas you've permanently shelved because you were waiting for the perfect time.
Think about the massive dreams you've quietly downsized over the years just to make the people around you feel more comfortable.
Think about the sheer capacity for greatness that you have slowly numbed and sedated with endless algorithmic scrolling and cheap, easily accessible comfort.
What if you drew a definitive line in the sand today?
What if you stopped waiting for the mythical one day and treated tomorrow as day one? What if, for the next 88 days, you ruthlessly, unapologetically, and obsessively fought for the exact life you know you deserve?
Because the truth is, if you swing the hammer every day, on day 89, you might not even recognize the person looking back at you in the mirror.
Subscribe to Audiobook Mode for more audiobook conversations like this, and share your biggest takeaway in the comments.